Excellency Sheikh Miyasa, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First, I would like to welcome the globally renowned artist Luc Tuymans, who is exhibiting for the first time in Qatar and the region. I am confident that you will make a significant contribution to the contemporary scene of Doha. I would also welcome Dr. Nicholas Cullinan, who is currently the director of National Portrait Gallery in London, but has also directed many successful exhibitions in the past and has lectured and published internationally. I seize the opportunity to thank Qatar Museum and Her Excellency Sheikh Miyasa for inviting me to be part of this distinguished panel and to exchange our views over the exhibition. It is very obvious that Tuymans' work has been affected by human issues and more specifically, international affairs. It raises important questions on a global economic and political power. I really don't want to go into more introduction, but I thought maybe we will talk on this panel for maybe about 20 minutes and really leave the door open for a question. I see a big crowd here, and I am sure they came out of interest and they have a lot of questions to ask our guest of honor here. If you will allow me, I will just say that looking carefully at your work, we feel directly concerned as population of the Middle East, since numbers of your painting depicts figures who have left significant impact on this part of the world or historical moment that changed the face of our region forever. Dr. Nicholas, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for being here. Before we begin, I just want to congratulate everyone involved in the exhibition. It's such a splendid event and really a phenomenal achievement. So I just want to begin by congratulating everyone. It's really a thrill to be here. The first question goes to Luc in the first instance, and it's to ask if you could just tell us a little bit about what having the exhibition here means to you and how it came about.
Well, it means a great deal to me because it's like unknown ground for me too. And it came about in a very personified way because Her Excellency Sheikh Miyasa and His Excellency Sheikh Yassim actually came to visit me. And so it is through this personal contact, which I think I want to stress, which is really important in these things, that things are made and things come about. And I started to think about the region as, of course, it's a conflictuous region, which makes it all the more interesting to do it, in a sense. And it also is a show of a certain magnitude that makes it also symbolic and important. And I think, especially in the terms of Sheikh Miyasa, it's not self-evident to do these things. It's really an effort that's been made. And so I will also put all my effort into it. So for me, it has a clear importance in terms of the region where it goes. And this is, as I say, unknown territory. And I do that as an invitation to a dialogue. And I do that with myself and the work that I make, which is clearly about Western image building, which is something quite specific, quite intentional in a way. And I'm therefore opening this dialogue to see how the work will resonate. I'll give you an example. When I did the show in the Tate Modern, there was this, because I mean, there was this resonance, but the most beautiful compliment you can get, I got it from a kid who was 7 years old who saw my show and sort of was impressed by it and gave me a drawing. This is the most beautiful, innocent gift you can get, because it's actually not by actually imitating all the information, or no, it is a clear thing. And I still believe in the fact that the visual language is something else as a written one.
Okay, the next question goes to both of you, and it's about the 5 site-specific works in the exhibition. So there's 5 works which existed before as paintings, and what Luc has done is to actually make another version of those paintings directly onto the wall of the gallery. It's a really extraordinary thing. And I think what that raises is, of course, the idea of site specificity, I can't say it, specific works for this site and context, and what that means to you, how we might read those works. If you could just talk a little bit about those 5 paintings. Was the choice of subjects deliberate? Is there a political resonance? And how might we read them here?
Well, these were works of which we didn't get the loans. That's one thing.
So it's an expedient.
So it has a very pragmatic way doing it. I've already made about 100 wall paintings out of different necessities, because of transportation, or there was no money or whatever. In this case, it was even more than that. It's also what the imagery was. It was an imagery that was chosen for this show. And I decided then, instead of repainting the paintings, I would go back to the source material. And the source material are press photographs out of the press. For example, there is the image which is called Egypt. The painting is also called Egypt, where you see 3 days before the Gulf War goes on, the last attempt of Mubarak to stop the war. You see the hand of Colin Powell, which is stretched. You see the glass rim. You see the hand of Mubarak, who is sort of defeated and laying down. I chose also in the image, in the painting, not to choose the figures. I was really interested in this language between the hands and the disconnection, and a connecting line, but as also disconnecting line between those things, and the failure of diplomacy. So this was a clear image. The other image is an image that shocked me because it reminded me of something like the First World War. The idea of the image of the clear conqueror, with the American Navy SEALs in one of the palaces of one of the sons of Saddam Hussein. And then there was another image, which is actually the power plant where the Israelis actually make their missiles. And actually that painting is in the museum in Tel Aviv. And then there was an image of a demolition of a building in '95, which is also a painting, which is owned by the MoMA. We also owned the painting of Condoleezza Rice, which was in the show called Proper. And of course, when it was shown next to, in that context, it immediately resonated to 9/11. So there are all these elements. But what I'm trying to say is that what's important is I did it in the blue color. And the one image that takes it all in a different direction is the image where I come from the sea. The image of Ostende, which a lot of people actually like. It's a phosphorus image of blue. The blue is important because it's printed matter, but it's also ink. And it has the element of space.
Do you want to speak to that point as well? How we read those works here, how the meaning or the context shifts according to site.
Excuse me. It just happened that when we talk about this particular painting of Mr. Mubarak and Mr. Powell, it happened that I represented my country as ambassador in the United States at the time. And before that, I was also ambassador to Egypt. So I really know both sides of these two words. Sometimes I will just explain this. In the real life, what you see really is not what you get. What it means, sometimes as individual, when we look at the news and see a specific moment, what are we seeing really there? What is behind it? What we're seeing is the real truth? It's only part of the truth. Sometimes, or most of the time, we are trained not to reveal secrets, Sheikh Mayasa, but I will tell this little a story of how the relation between the United States and Egypt. And mostly, the does the US really dictate sometimes it is policies in specific countries or a specific individual? I would say yes. We might not talk about it, but it goes there. So portraying these two hands in that manner, it really tells a big story. And I just have said, yes, I think it indicates that somebody is telling the other how to conduct things in the proper way.
I think that leads directly to the next point, which is one of the more pressing questions to ask, which is about titles. And so, of course, the title of the exhibition here is Intolerance, which is a title of a work from 1993, which is a still life painting. It nods to the work of Morandi. I understand it's a series of vessels that your mother owned, that you painted. Yeah. And also it relates to a film. And so you might talk a bit about that, but just before we get into that, what I want to bring up is this slippery relationship between what we see and the title given to it. So for example, there's other works in the exhibition, an early work called Child Abuse, which does not depict the subject, it's essentially abstract. Other almost abstract works are called Embitterment. And then equally, there's another painting in the exhibition called The Heritage, which is of a man who looks rather banal and ordinary, and yet has a very specific history and meaning for you. And so I wanted to ask how careful we need to be about the title-image relationship in the exhibition and what the overall title signifies of the exhibition, if anything.
Yes, I mean, when I started out showing my work, started to give them titles, which was actually not done. It was more like it should speak for itself and so on and so on. But sometimes the title is just saying what is depicted, you know? And sometimes the title is just, what is this? Sometimes the title is actually something else, which opens up the possibility for a sub-image that's even not painted. And of course I come out of the tradition, and we all know René Magritte, who actually had the one painting of the pipe, on which it says, "Ceci n'est pas une pipe," which means this is not a pipe. Of course not, because it's the image of a pipe. And in that sense, actually, what is this? So in that sense, it's actually, I thought it interesting to do. Now with the child abuse, it's actually because when I showed it to somebody thought about that, and I kept that. So there is in that sense, an on and on, some kind of tight and loose situation. Now the title of the show, Intolerance, is of course also a film by W. Griffith, which was a big production in 1914, which was also about Orientalism. It was with real elephants, and it was like the biggest film production at that point. It was also a big illusion, because film is an illusion. But the title Intolerance also incorporates the opposite, which is tolerance. Like I did the show where the Condi painting was in, and the demolition painting was called Proper, which implies improper. Actually, in my language, proper means actually like hygienic, you see? So there is different elements that play out in that situation. And they have to be taken in an ironic way, in a double way, in a sort of devious way in a sense. Then, in the larger picture, seeing the fact where Western imagery building comes from, it comes from a region that has sort of postulated its powers through religion, through wars, and through highly, significantly violent and decisive technology. This is the element of survival, in a sense. And so, if we go back to the Renaissance, where we see the warlords acquiring culture through the Michelangelos and the Leonardo da Vinci's, that is an interesting point too. So in that sense, the whole idea of intolerance is a far bigger concept. And my work is also not just one thing, it's several things. When I make a painting of Condi, it's not just to criticize her, it's also because I'm genuinely intrigued about the fact that she is so contained. The fact that also that she is an aberration within this Bush legislation. And historically, she made the right choice because the Republican Party abolished slavery, not the Democrats. On the other hand, I mean, what did she add up to? We never know. And maybe my painting will even surpass the importance of Condoleezza Rice. I also have to say, and I always say this, politicians die, art never does. And in that sense, there is a clear signifier, a clear difference between what politics can do and what culture can do. Culture goes over barriers, over regions. And this is actually what the show is about. The show is like an engine. You have the round circular space which we decidedly made in a specific color. A color which is night blue, which is a beautiful color. It's a color about space. But it's also a color that's intimidating. It's on the wall, the first wall of the building. You already see part of the image, which is an image about illusion. It's an image about, actually, a theme park made by Walt Disney, but it was also a utopic idea of trying to make the perfect world, so to speak. This, of course, always will be a failure, but it is an attempt. This is the main engine. From there on, the imagery starts. There is also a clear, decisive point why the images are painted on that spot, site-specific, right before you go into a more darkened space where you will see the drawings, where you see the preliminary thought in order to come to a painting. So what I'm trying to give you is an aspect of time. And when I still remember when the very first Gulf War started, what I was the most afraid of was the rhetoric. The rhetoric of Islam that goes over events. And it has been proven right. There is a prophecy into that. Now, my paintings will surpass me, which means, in effect, there is also something with painting, which is a slow medium, that will work with time, through time, over time. And think up to my time, probably, yeah?
And do you want to speak to this point as well? We were saying just before in conversation that, in a way, this exhibition for Luc is a test to see how his images stand up to a different context, a different reading. Perhaps you want to address this.
Yes, before that, I would really like to raise the question of related or the relation between politics and culture. Because you once said, life is politics, basically. But you don't go to the gallery and put the word art and politics on the wall. How do you decide what to put on the wall?
Something else. So it could be a painting, it could be an image, it could be something that actually, yeah, I mean, it could be an element of decoration. In my case, that would not be the case, of course. But I mean, the thing is that it for sure will make a more diverse statement, a more bilateral, a more sort of like layered statement than just that statement, because that statement doesn't mean anything. But what I actually meant is that a work of art cannot be loaded up politically from the start, because then we are talking propaganda. But a work of art can have a special political stance at a given moment in time.
And equally, you don't control the reading, that the reading constantly shifts according to the period in which it's seen. So a painting is never fixed.
No, of course not. Sorry, of course not. Because in fact, when my show went to 4 spots in the States, the minute I held it together to show it in the Palais Beaux-Arts in Brussels, and the day I had my opening, my country won the world record without a government. So I'm in front of the entire international press. What do they ask? What do you think about Belgium? So this is what I mean. But at that point, the whole Flemish element of nationalism came up again. There's this flag painting of me here. And that was painted in '95 out of disgust of a xenophobe Flemish nationalist party. But at that point, there was a new party, was swallowed the other one, and was very important in this crisis. So there, it becomes again important. So that is what I actually mean. It's a rotating of elements, as it also is a layerment in how you can perceive. And the perception changes all the time.
When you stand in front of a canvas and you have a specific idea you want to implement on that canvas, so are you starting with the title, or you drawing and as it develops, you come to the title?
It's actually, I think it's much more, I titled them afterwards. I tried to figure out titles afterwards, also for the shows. I tried to find one word that sort of rings a bell or changes everything. I mean, for the worse or the better, I don't know.
And to that point, could you just talk us through how you make an image? So obviously all of your images your paintings come from found images. They're images that you find either in books or on the internet. So what I want to know is what comes first, the idea or the image? And then how you execute that. So do you go out and look for images because you know what you want to make, or?
Well, sometimes that's also a failure. I mean, I can have an idea and try to look at it and inform myself, and that works, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the image is right next to me and I just don't see it. And that can be the powerful point. But of course, like when you make a series about the Jesuits, I read 10 books about what the Jesuits are all about and try to find some significant visual. Because I have to say, whatever it means, the visual has to be significant in the first place. It has to be has to have tension enough for me to make it. And I also don't want everybody to see the same thing in it as I see in it. Just I have to have this conviction that is relevant to do. Because I work already with existing imagery, which is recognizable. So when I try to rework it, it should be having a sort of different twist so that it can make people think.
Do you mind if I just jump in? That relates to the next point, which is in the exhibition, which I believe is the most comprehensive exhibition of your work that's ever been staged. So for the first time, you can really chart the way that your work has developed from the inceptions to now. And what really struck me spending time in the exhibition is the relationship in your work to, of course, photography and film, which is a commonplace, much discussed, but just for the benefit of everyone here, Luc, of course, began as a painter and then spent 3 years in the early 80s as a filmmaker. And so there's a very important relationship in your work, not just to photography, but also to film. But what really struck me in the exhibition was the shift from analog film and photography to digital. That comes through loud and clear in the exhibition. So the earlier works, of course, relate to Polaroids, now defunct mediums, or the blur of analog film and photography, whereas the more recent work addresses more the pixelated image and, for example, the glow emitting from the screen rather than the thrown or projected light that we have with analog film. And that's an interesting point in itself, but it raises a second interesting point, which is perhaps more provocative. There's a really interesting book that was published a few years ago, which argues that digital culture, because of its reliance on pixels, is essentially Islamic, because it's a tessellated pattern, and so that now visual culture around the world is more Islamic than Western. And so I wanted to ask Luc if that chimes with him, what he thinks about that.
It's the first time I hear that. But I think it's a good try, yeah. Let's put it that way. It's a bit far-fetched, I think. But I mean, any image is, and this is, we're talking about the thin line between abstraction and figuration. I think the line between abstraction and figuration is very thin. And so even a person like Mondrian, who was deriving through actually what you just said, not pixels, but actually chopping up the image, because he knew in 1925, when you have industrialization going as full speed, he knew that the world as a whole was no longer to be perceived. So you only see it in parts and particles. And that is actually also a little bit what the pixels are, in a sense. So I think it's to narrow that down to one idea like that would be more like Islamic, I think is also a sort of narrowing down the Islam in a sense, so to a pixel, which I don't think you could do. So in a sense, no, it's a bigger idea. The visual is always rather difficult to explain, otherwise we wouldn't make it.
No, I think the same thing for me. I really never have heard of this before. But if we look at Islamic work, art in general, most of it is really abstract. But now to reduce that to pixels, I just don't see the relation and that explanation. I want you to explain to us how is that explained? How is that?
It's not my book, but it's an interesting book. I mean,
No,
I
but you
don't
have
agree
read
with
it. I haven't read it. So please tell us a little bit, yes, about how do they relate pixels to yeah, tell us, please.
Well, it's what the book argues is that, so obviously the 20th century was dominated in essence by film and photography. Those were the prevailing mediums. Painting existed, and this is another discussion to have, the relationship about painting to film and photography, but I think we've covered it. And what film and photography is based on is celluloid film, which is biological. And so what you have is more of a blur, because if something happens in the film and it degrades, it blurs, it doesn't fragment. And now in digital culture, and this is what many artists are responding to, the pixel is a tessellated pattern that fragments into blocks, basically. And so it's, I mean, I agree, it's a little bit reductive, but it's an interesting point to situate Luc's work in, because what comes through in the exhibition very clearly is this shift from the early work, which relied on analog film and photography, to digital media. But anyway, I think we've already been speaking for about half an hour, so we should probably open it up to questions at this point. Otherwise, we'll go on talking quite happily. But are there any questions in the audience? Raise your hands. Don't be shy. Otherwise, we'll go on speaking. A question over there.
Hello, thank you. I have a question regarding your role as the artist and your involvement in the curatorial process of making the exhibition, which I understand is quite strong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am pretty adamant about that. Probably intolerant. So the thing is that I've virtually, even with the collaboration of curators in terms of a concept, virtually put up and installed all my shows, which by now 120 solo shows. Group shows I don't do anymore. But especially because it is quite a specific thing for me. It's also like, that's also the kick, you know, that kicks it off. I mean, otherwise it would be really boring to see the same paintings all the time, again and again and again. As you can see here, the show is not put into a chronological order. It's put into pockets of meanings in different spaces. And what is interesting, that has to do according to the space. This is a totally different space as the Haus der Kunst, so not every painting will work. And it's interesting to see how small paintings, formats will work in this space and how they can hold the space. This is always a fight, because people think it's just easy, just hang the painting on the wall. No. It's important where you hang it. I had a fight once with a German who wants to hang everything in the middle. I said, no, we're hanging it off, because it's going to find its own spot in the wall, and there it's going to stay. And this is where you feel, and this is like millimeters, where you feel the precision coming, where you feel something, how the work, although it is still, it starts to move. My work is all about silence, but filled, mute. It shouldn't remind you of sound, nor music, let alone the sound of music. So it is actually really important how they relate to each other. And therefore the whole show is also one image. Every show in a gallery, which is the first time it's shown, every work should be in its own right an important work, but it should also as an entirety within all the group of images be one sort of solid vacuum. And this is maybe also the element of the resonance of the film, the idea that film gave me, the fact, but there is a similarity between film and, for example, painting. If I would be a photographer, I would be too late. But with filming, as well as painting, I can approach the image through the lens and I can paint away. So.
Okay, are there any other questions from the audience? I have one that follows on from what Luc just said, but anyone else? Raise your hands. Okay, I'm going to jump in. So one thing I want to ask, the other really important thing about the exhibition is the role of drawing, which for me is a revelation, to have all of these drawings that relate to the paintings, and not just drawings, but also essentially dioramas, the work Arena from 1978, which I've never seen before. I wonder if you could just talk us a little bit through the relationship of the drawings to the paintings and how they work.
Well, some of the drawings are made as preliminary exercise to, of course, come to the, like you see the rear mirror. There's, for example, the watercolor of the rear mirror was, of course, made first. And also it goes vice versa, because I mean there are these prints that I made, which were made, the etchings, which were made after a lot of watercolors, and again I made a Polaroid again, and so on and so on. And then eventually these prints lead to a painting. So an already sort of finished object. So it's a little bit vice versa, but I think most of the time that's the thinking process. And in coming to the idea of, because you mentioned digital and so on, I don't think it's important to fight new media, because you're not going to win that. You're just going to put them into the toolbox. And the specificality of a painting is as such that it has a physicality and a sort of time zone and a mind of its own.
Yeah. If I may also pose a question to you, sorry, audience. How would you like your audience, when they look at your paintings, are you giving them the opportunity to interpret it according to their background and understanding and culture? Or are you trying to tell them something from you? No, you have to understand it, or you have to interpret it in such a way.
No, I leave that open-ended in a sense, and I already said that for me it's important to make it that I have this. I don't, and I already said before, I'm not going to ram the same meaning through anybody's throat in the same way. So it's just that it's more interesting to see what other reaction can come up, what other idea it will trigger. That's why we do shows. That's why I show my work. Otherwise, I actually wouldn't do it.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes left, so I'm just going to start the conversation again with one question and then give the opportunity for anyone from the audience to ask any final questions. The question I really wanted to ask Luc was, seeing this exhibition, which is the most comprehensive survey of your work, does it change how you think about it? Are you thinking differently about it?
Well, every exhibition seems to be the most comprehensive that I've made, because that's how they advertise them all. So, what can I say, right? No, of course it's not comprehensive at all. It has to remain incomprehensive. There was this question to talk more about the politics in my work, because I already did that in a sense, and I want to say one thing. It's not me, it's the politics that come to me, which is really weird. So life is politics, you know, just every human transaction you do is political in a sense, because it has consequences. What I'd like to say, in art, that's a little bit different. It goes into a different time zone. And it can have political consequences, but it's mostly a symbolic world. And that symbolic world can have critical mass. If we think back to what in my civilization, let's say Rome, was the most political painting of the first hour, it would be the painting of the execution of one of the May paintings of Goya. What do we mainly see? We see a sign. Not the X-Files, but we see a sign that blocks off, and that particular sign is the sign where one protects, but could also be wounded. And in that sense, for me, that was the starting point. It's after that people like Manet saw it, or Jeff Wall saw it later on, and I saw it, of course. These paintings were not made to be seen. They were in the royal palace, and they were made to save his neck, because he, of course, had sort of intrinsic relationship with people and officers from the revolutionary French army that, of course, by then, when the kings came back, so we made two paintings, one of the uprisal and one of the execution, which was the onslaught of the French army. Another painting that could be slightly interesting, and which we own in Brussels because it was left behind, and this is the closest painting that you can come to power in terms of propaganda, is The Death of Marat by David. this is the most diabolical painting. It is propaganda. It is, the slit is very small. What is written on the paper is not true. And he did it twice, because he also did Napoleon, in a way. So in a sense, this is what's interesting. I don't know if that's interesting or relevant. Yeah.
Should we see if there's any questions from the floor? Are there, yeah, okay, we've got two here, so if you can just wait for a mic. Okay, the gentleman just over there.
Hi. I'm thinking about space, obviously with Doha aside. If you think about where you've exhibited your work all over the world, what would you say was the most inspirational space? I mean, I've seen some of your work exhibited in London, at places like the Saatchi and the Tate. But where in the world would you say has been the most inspirational for you?
Well, this is, although it's a temporary space, it's an amazing space because you can create daylight which isn't even there, which is insane. The other space that is, and it's also the exact same height as the space which was kind of inspirational, which is the Haus der Kunst in Munich, which was built after 1933, and although a fascist building, has an empowering impact, and you have to resist that, you have to fight that. And those are the interesting spaces. They're not necessarily the greatest architecture, but in this case, the Haus der Kunst was developed by an architect who made cruisers. It's like a corridor. And I'm clear, and I'm very suspicious that Herzog de Meuron come out of that Rome, you know. So that's this element of the corridor going on forever is an interesting space. And so, well, every space is different, and I think the work has to be versatile enough to do that, to withstand that, to deal with that. I don't want to build walls in it, and I don't want to disfigure the space. No, we'll work with it as it is, and that is the challenge.
There was another question just over here.
Yes, painting, the medium of painting, has been pronounced dead and buried, you know, so many times in the 20th century, and at certain points an artist comes along and finds a way out of that, and Mondrian was one who you mentioned earlier. And I think in the early 90s there was really a sense that really was it. You know, it was the last time painting as a medium was really over. But then from, I guess, around about 20 years ago, as early as 20 years ago, you were one of a handful of people, a handful of artists who were being talked about as really not saving painting, but finding a new way to use that medium to express the condition of the late 20th and early 21st century. And I just wondered, as a painter, once people started to talk about you in those terms, you know, do you stay aware of it? Do you deal with that? Do you try to forget about it? Or how do you live with that knowledge, shall we say?
Basically, this is a ludicrous misunderstanding of critical articles that have been misinterpreted. Every medium has its capacity and specificality. My clear answer, standard answer for the last 25 years was, I do paint because I'm not naive. Painting was the first conceptual art form, be it in a cave or a grotto. It is the first way of thinking about imagery, and it still is. And look at now, how much painting do we have? It's still the most powerful artifact. So there's no naivete there. It has never been that. It's just been luring all the time. And to give you another idea, how appalling the impact is of a painting. Once, during the ex-Yugoslavian wars, there was a photographer who won a prize, the World Press Photography Prize, because he blew up a painting of a mother with her dead son, and it was a Pietà. This is how painting functions. It is iconic, and therefore it is there. There is no naivete. I mean, don't think that the cave paintings in Lascaux were just about figuring out how to hunt. No, it was a symbolic move with a symbolic importance. And it was already then highly, highly sophisticated.
Do we have any final questions? We have one there. This will probably be the last question.
Thank you. So my question is for Ambassador Al Dafaa, and it's quite a specific question. I mean, a little earlier, you touched upon the overreach between politics and culture, and you spoke a little bit about Colin Powell, his in terms of politics, and Condoleezza Rice as well, since they have been a part of our artist collection before. So, in the sense that you have the art aspect as well, but you also have the political aspect, having that political background, being an ambassador yourself. So how do you see that kind of being, I don't know, important to the specific topic that we're talking about, but also how important is the topic of the collection also to Qatar today, and how that fits into the Qatari case and the Middle Eastern case specifically?
By the way, the young lady who just asked me the question, she happened to be my daughter. Well, actually, I was going to ask this question and the relation again between culture and politics. When we look at this region, and when I say this region, I'm talking about the Middle East, which really has been the birthplace of civilizations. Most religion came from this part of the world. Culture also, first civilization started in this part of the world. Today, when we look around and we see 4 wars are in our backyards, a lot of killing, a lot of destruction, a lot of waste of human life and material. My question to you, yes, you have had exhibition in different parts of the world, but does that really, or this exhibition here in Doha, does it relate to you somehow the relation between intolerance and what is going on in this part of the world?
Yeah, of course it can relate in that sense, because there's always been intolerance, basically. We have lived on it. But what's more interesting is what the opportunities would be, in a sense. What would come out of it? What is the constructive part of it? And that is also part of culture, I think. And lots of times that's not part of the political world, because the political world is about clear interests. Culture is not, because it's a bigger interest. And this is where the possibility lies. And however bloody, however horrific it can all be, it is part of human existence and experience.
Not to be, speaking of intolerance, not to be intolerant, but I'm afraid we're out of time. So I just want to thank you all for coming tonight. And please join me in thanking Ambassador Dafaa and also Luc Tuymans and congratulating him on the show. Thank you.